Good evening. I'm Claremont Featherstone, inviting you to Security Focus. This evening, just before I get into the regular discourse, I would like to report on an inspirational piece. About 2 years ago, I started a little canteen, a little soup kitchen with a benevolent twist. And there were about 4 persons who came regularly, and we would have assisted them on an almost daily basis. But somewhere along the line, a young gentleman came and we started to talk. And during those discussions, he told me that he was from Berbice, he had attended the President's College, and sometime later, I found out that he had also attended the University of Guyana. But he would come and we would talk, and he latched on to me. And I wondered why. And I started to think. And I wanted to know if he was the son of a relative of mine, perhaps, who's perhaps looking for his dad. Perhaps they hadn't the best of relation. And I even looked inside of me and wanted to know, even though I have not fooled around, I wanted to know if he was the son of a former girlfriend of old or what have you. And then I went into some other thoughts. I wanted to know whether he came to spy on me. I'm in the security industry and one cannot be too safe. So you're always thinking about who is looking at you and so forth. And he's there. He's not going anywhere. See him from time to time. And at a particular point, he said to me, I am not so well and I need to have perhaps a surgery or some sort of corrective measure because my liver is failing me. And then it dawned on me that perhaps he was reaching out because he felt that I might know of someone who can assist, whatever. Since then, we became real close, perhaps a year and a half, and we would talk. And I decided that I would research the possibility of him being able to go to a country to do this liver transplant surgery. He felt that he could afford it in Brazil, perhaps Mexico, the United States, all over. I felt that the best place was India. Suffice it to say that by the time this program is aired, in a few days, he would have completed his tests in an hospital in New Delhi, India, where he would then replace his current liver with a new liver. So that is a little success, inspirational piece that I wanted to report to the viewers. But today, I want to talk about the deployment of specialist service dogs. So for those of you who are dog lovers, we will talk about dogs today. I've always wondered why the prison and the police, but especially the prison service, has not been deploying dogs. If you are deploying 6 dogs at the Lusignan prison or between the Georgetown and Lusignan prison, you will reduce escapes and attempts at escaping by 3/4. Because I'll tell you what, there is no way on this earth that a person who is attempting or negotiating an escape could make that escape successfully without being bitten severely by an active service dog. So let us go through briefly how a deployment program is mounted. The National Guard Service at one time was the largest kennel in this country, and I think in the entire Caribbean, and even in some developed countries, because at that time the National Guard Service had about 75, 80 dogs. And of those, there would always be dogs of various ages, but at least 20 or thereabout puppies, 6 weeks, 12 weeks, 6 months, 4 months, yearlings. Always had a lot of young dogs. And the National Guard Service at a point in time had replaced the police force with respect to the deployment of specialist service dogs in the country. So much so that they would have worked at the cricket. I recall working when the police consumers burned down somewhere around 84, and at a lot of the larger entities that were under construction during the Burnham's tenure in office. Edible Oil Mill, President's College, the Sonata Textile, and a couple of other entities that took up expansive areas. And back in those days, persons would come with improvised shotguns, soft shotguns, and they were never able. I know of no case where a dog handler connected with the National Guard Service was shot or stabbed. And we did a lot of work in this country. Ministerial residents, diplomatic residents, businesses, state entities, banks, factories, you name it, industrial complexes, you name it, and the National Guard Service protected it during the Fox-Burnham era. The reason why dogs are so successful in their deployment is because they don't need day off, they need rest. They don't need day off, as is the case with officers. They are now subject to the emotional highs and lows, domestic problems and so forth that the officers are subject to. They are on all four so that they can run at high speed and change direction in an instant without toppling over, so that they're better suited to expansive areas which the human cannot work. Better sight than mankind, better hearing than mankind, and a nose that is millions of times better than a human nose. For example, we have about 12,000 receptor cells, whereas the dog has about 200 million receptor cells. So they are best suited for security work and the kind of work that we currently have at the prisons, for starters. But they can be utilized also at the fire service or the fire department because they are best when it comes to detecting accelerants, so that they can determine and take the fire officer or investigator directly to the point of origin of a fire and determine that that fire was started by an arson, and therefore isolate the accelerant that might have been used and all of these things. So I believe that we ought to pay some second view or review of the whole aspect of deploying dogs throughout this country, because really I have not seen a country, a developing country, one that is at our state of development, our stage of development, faced with the kind of developmental problems and security-related problems that we have, that has been able to frog leap those problems without introducing or paying keen attention to the deployment of dogs. When we come back, I will address a few other important points in a deployment program. Please stay tuned. Security Focus is brought to you by Regium International, Northwest Investment Inc., Intelligard Specialist Security Services, and the Institute of Security and Public Safety. Welcome back. So I want us to deal briefly with the virtues of a deployment program. We in Guyana have had lots of problems with corruption in our deployment programs. And in many developed countries, Israel, India, and a couple of other countries, found that if you give each agency a budget, the police, the army, the fire service, the prison service, their individual budget for the deployment of dogs, somewhere along the line it is squandered, and people do all sorts of things. So what a lot of countries have done, Australia, New Zealand, India, Israel, Spain, and a couple of others, have a nodal agency working under the auspices of, say, the Ministry of Public Security, and that agency is responsible for mounting the deployment program. And independent agencies would make representation to that agency on a yearly basis for X amount of trained dogs. So they train the dogs, and then they take the handlers and they marry the handler to the dog. And I'll explain that. Pairing. And they marry the handler to the dog, and they use them as a pair, complete the training, and send them out to agencies. So say the prison service would say we want 6. The agency might say you could only get 4 this year, you'll get the other 2 next year, as the case may be. So that over time, the prison service gets a certain amount of dogs, the police service gets a certain amount, the army, the fire service, the customs, and the agricultural department, forestry, who have you. Everybody gets an opportunity to field an interest, and that interest is dealt with in terms of priority. I spoke briefly of pairing. And when I said pairing, what I meant is this. There is a saying in the deployment of dogs. The dog portrays the characteristics of the handler. And so what you do, you try to pair a dog that has similar characteristics or shares similar characteristics with the handler. Some handlers in a deployment program will handle 2 or 3 dogs at a time. Some handlers will only handle 1. In my days, I had 3 dogs because I was able to handle 3 dogs. Some of my experiences during those years told me that the dog is much more efficient because a trained dog and handler replaces up to 6 unarmed officers, whether they're police officers, prison officers, security officers. 6 unarmed officers. But even armed officers are limited in their abilities at times when it comes to being compared with what a dog and handler, unarmed dog and handler, can do. Because when the dog goes out there, the dog can scent you from a corner and beyond. So whether it is in the army or the police force, no one can possibly sneak up or ambush a dog handler. And that is why in the army, the dog handlers are way at the head so that they help to clear the way for the troops. And the same happens with dogs and handlers. I've worked on a number of cases, and I've had situations where people ran and left grenades, soft shotgun. I had a situation with a soft shotgun at Edible Oil Mill on the East Bank. Had a situation, soft shotgun, at the textile mill in 84 thereabout. Had a situation with a soft shotgun at the President's College. Had a situation with a grenade at the intelligence office where persons were coming through the estate. So it is very difficult for you to sneak up on a dog and handler team. Our problem seems to be that we cannot get past in Guyana the three major hurdles that prevent the proper mounting of a canine program. One has to do with the salary. And I've told Guyanese officials, I said, I don't care who gave you what. You are not going to get dog handlers, trained dog handlers, to work for anything below 100,000. When the dog handler reaches at home at the end of a month, he must have $100,000 on him. When you could do that, and it could be done, when you could do that, you are going to have a big piece of crime bitten out of it. Because hear this. The criminal tells the police, you can't shoot me because you read this piece of act and you read what the United Nations said and you read what everybody else said, you read what the Privy Council said. But you know what dog handlers always tell people? It says, hear this. You see all them papers that you're talking about? I read them. I know what they say. We got one problem. You see this thing here with this tail at one end and a set of teeth at the other end? In reading nothing. And they usually get the message. So that people who intend to make life difficult for security forces and the prison and the like, they don't mess with dog handlers. A dog handler can clear an entire area in a matter of minutes because nobody wants the dog to attach his or her set of teeth in the ribs cage. Plain and simple. Dog bite hurt real bad. I've worked at places. My dogs have not bitten people very much in my career. Persons were bitten about 3 or 4 times. But I remember vividly a man in an embassy compound was bitten by a dog that I worked. And he was bitten up. He wasn't bitten. And when we took him to the Georgetown Hospital, he was in shock for a long, long time. And that is the kind of fear that dogs drive into people who set out to break the law. So I believe we should try starting this whole thing all over again in a very small way. A simple kennel facility, 2 dogs, 3 dogs that can work, 3 dogs that can be used as breeding stock and start from there. If we are looking for tracker dogs, if we are looking for drug sniffing dogs, we could get them from any animal shelter abroad. We can just ask for them and somebody go up and select them and they present them to us. When we are looking for police dogs per se, which has to be dogs with strong genes and a strong drive and willpower for work, then we go to specialist kennels and we buy some dogs, and we buy dogs that we know can reproduce, replicate themselves over time. If we find, as in the case of the German Shepherd, that the dog cannot work here as a shepherd, then what we do is get a stable cross done. as I know it, the most stable cross I've seen in Guyana over the last 30 or 40 years is the German Shepherd Doberman cross. Makes a very stable dog, and we can use that throughout the country. If we are operating in the prison service, Mazaruni, Timeri, Luziknan, a better bet is the Rhodesian Ridgeback, because the Ridgeback would have hunted lions in Africa, and it is a hardier dog, much more receptible to the diseases and the kind of thing that it would encounter in a wooded environment. So we have options. We can even get Guyanese to contribute dogs and see how this whole program goes all over again. Because I'm not very optimistic that the Guyana Police Force, the prison service, even the fire service will be able, in this new oil dispensation, to honor their obligations to the nation without the inclusion of security dogs, specialist deployment dogs, tracker dogs, and sniffer dogs onto those agencies. We can even ask some of the agencies overseas to help us with training. And they're always willing. I go to them all the time to do refresher work. They're always willing to help. I think our major problem here has to do with the bureaucracy and the ego and so many bosses and corruption. And if there is nothing in it for me, then it is not going to see the light of day. But I know there are persons in this country, educated folks, who are lovers of dogs and who are willing to even come aboard and volunteer their services to see such a program elevated and managed in an effective way. I hope the government officials are viewing this particular episode, and I hope that we will see in the very near future the inclusion, or at least a revisit to the whole notion of including dogs into our security apparatus. It was indeed a pleasure being with you this evening. I'm Claremont Featherstone saying, do have an enjoyable rest of the day. Thanks for viewing.